The emergency alert that appeared on my phone's screen read, "The creatures have been eradicated. Any remaining survivors should seek aid at the nearest communal bomb shelter." My mind eased as I read the words. Seemed as though the bombs had actually worked, and from where I stood, the coast was clear. I looked back at the bunker and my mind went back to the things that I had seen during my stay in there. There's no way I could live the rest of my life in there. The only thing left for me to do would be to obey the message. The nearest communal bomb shelter was located relatively far from my current location, and the trek on foot would be far from ideal. I needed to find a working vehicle that had not been affected by the bombs or some other means of transportation. However, if the alert was true, walking would definitely be a possibility. I stepped out of the bunker and the cool morning air hit me again. I guess the Craig's house above me no longer stood in its entirety, otherwise I would not have been feeling a gust of wind in his basement. The gun I had dropped before entering the bunker, that had landed on the ground at the bottom of the staircase, was no longer anywhere to be seen. The weirdest part about the situation, though, is that Craig's body was missing too. The pool of blood where he had been lying remained. What was left of him had been moved elsewhere. It simply vanished. It was exceptionally weird that the gun and Craig's body would be missing. But these creatures had used a bait trick on me once before, so I decided it'd be better to forget about the gun and solely rely on the one that I had obtained in the bunker, if I happened to still need it. Regardless, I didn't want to stay by the door of the bunker for much longer, and I couldn't only rely on the correctness of what the emergency alert had told me. There was no telling whether the creatures had silently returned, or remained here for some time since the bombs had dropped if they were actually still alive and lurking. I moved towards the staircase, which seemed to be unharmed by the bombs. The entire basement seemed completely intact, for that matter. At the top of the stairs, the door that had once been there was no longer, and the morning light shone through. I slowly began climbing the staircase, waiting for the moment where a lurking creature would pounce on me and end my life. But as I reached the top and peeked out over the doorway, not a single sound could be heard. The house around me was in shambles. The ceiling and the walls had been severely damaged, leaving only a skeleton of what this place once was behind, but without a creature in sight. Now was a better time to move than ever. I slowly moved towards what was once a perfectly intact window, but now just a frame which faced the street. Through the window I could see that it was not only Craig's house that had been severely damaged, but every other house within my line of sight and all the surrounding foliage was in a similar state. Anything that could survive the impact of the bombs that were dropped would have to have been superhuman. There's no way any normal living being could come out of something like that unscathed. At this point I realized the likelihood of me finding a functioning vehicle near my location would be next to none, and without the keys to a random person's car that was safely tucked away in the garage, it'd be useless. To get there by foot, it would take at least an hour, maybe even 2, depending on the speed that I'd be traveling. I needed to have faith that there really was no creatures remaining on the surface, or I wouldn't last very long in the outside world. My only other option was returning to the bunker, which would cause me to spiral further into losing my mind, and there's no way I'd be doing that if there was hope that other survivors waited for me. Human company is what I so desperately needed. Without much of a second thought, I decided to cautiously leave the remains of what was once Craig's house and head in the direction of the communal bomb shelter where I pleaded only survivors would meet me. Human survivors, that is. The sound of birds chirping and the other background noise that we got so accustomed to was eerily absent, and the charred buildings and foliage gave the neighborhood a mute tone. I thought about humming to myself while walking to my destination, but the thought of a lone remaining creature hearing me from somewhere it had been hiding during the bombs forced me to keep my mouth closed and travel with a light step. Moving towards the shelter, I kept a firm grip on my gun and remained on high alert, cautiously scanning my surroundings. I prayed not to see a creature peer from a broken window or around the corner, and that I would never have the misfortune of looking one of those creatures in the eye again. The eyes of those creatures had been scarred into the back of my mind. I thought back to the first time I had locked eyes with them through my neighbor's window. Even the image in my head caused me to feel extreme paranoia, almost as though I was being watched from afar or stalked. but there was no obvious signs that this was actually the case. About 3/4 of the way to the shelter, I began letting my guard down. I had almost completely convinced myself that there was truly no creatures remaining here, because I surely would have run into one by this point if the alert had been deceptive or inaccurate. I felt safe, for the most part, and holstered the gun that I had been holding in my waistband to rest my arm. I glanced behind me as a simple precaution, and what met my gaze sent a shiver down my spine. A dark figure moving swiftly behind a fence a few hundred meters down the street from the direction I had come. My heart skipped a beat. There was no doubt in my mind that the figure I had just seen was one of the creatures. I froze for a moment and kept my eyes on where I had seen the creature disappear. A few moments passed, and I tried to convince myself that my mind had simply been playing tricks on me. Had I actually seen that creature, or was it just something my mind had created out of paranoia? Moments later, however, the creature's face peeked from the fence it had disappeared behind, and its eyes locked with mine like I was hoping would never happen again. My mind suddenly flooded with images of the creatures, and the image of Craig's mangled body appeared in front of me. Screaming in horror, I broke my gaze from the creature's huge, deep, sunken white eyes and swiftly turned around towards the shelter. There was no longer any doubt in my mind that I was being followed, and without looking back, I began sprinting towards the shelter, faster than I'd ever run before. I couldn't hear anything behind me, but I had no desire to look back and experience what those creatures had just done to me once again, or even slow down for a second. Continuously, I braced myself for a swift slash from behind that would end my life, but was yet to come. My gun was once again grasped tightly in my hand, not wanting to drop my weapon for a second. Sprinting had closed the gap between me and the shelter. I turned onto the street which it was located on, and now only a few hundred meters of open street stood between me and my new safe haven. The large yellow sign that declared the purpose of the building I was heading towards came into view, but I then realized that the doors to the shelter were closed, and there was not a single person waiting for me outside. I had no other option but to pray that there was someone on the other side willing to open the door for me. A gut feeling took over me, convincing me that the creature was right behind me, ready to mangle my body like what it had done to Craig and compel me to turn around and look. I turned around while still moving towards the shelter door, and to my bewilderment, the coast was clear. I stopped dead in my tracks for a moment, truly debating whether or not I had already gone mad. There was no way what I had seen wasn't real. I couldn't believe that. I turned again back towards the shelter and noticed the door was open and that a man stood just outside of the shelter and was waving me over. The man yelled at the top of his lungs for me to run. Swiftly, I checked behind me again, and what I saw made me feel as though I was going to have a heart attack right then and there. A huge horde of those creatures charged in my direction, quickly closing the gap between me and them. Purposefully, I avoided looking at their faces, and without a second thought, turned on my heels and raced towards the door. The man swiftly moved back into the shelter, and for a second, I thought that he would close the door before I made it inside, but to my relief, he kept it open. A moment after I stepped inside the shelter, the man slammed the door shut behind me for a huge thud to the other side, and caused it to open again slightly. A barrage of loud thuds came from the other side of the door, and I slammed my body up against it, trying to close it again, far enough to lock it in place. Just then, a huge effort from the creatures was made, and the door swung completely open, sending me tumbling down a staircase, adrenaline rushing through my body, and the pain from falling down the stairs was masked by the fear that these creatures had just breached the door to the shelter. I looked up the staircase that I had just descended, and to my dismay, I saw the creatures violently tearing apart the man's body who had helped me a moment ago. All of the hope I once had was lost at this point, but I struggled to my feet and I jolted towards a door that appeared to separate the entrance from the main living area. Tumbling through the door, I was shocked to see dozens of other people crowded on the other side of the room. Some of these people were trembling on the ground, others were yelling complete gibberish, and I quickly turned back around and slammed the door closed. This door was not one that could take much of a beating, but I believed that any time I bought could help me. Without thinking, I started dragging any furniture that wasn't bolted down in front of the door, trying to form some sort of barricade to slow the creatures down. A young girl's voice screamed from somewhere behind me, asking me where her dad was, and I could only assume that her dad was the man who I had just seen die right in front of my eyes. I started yelling for people to help me, and the creatures were going to get in here if we didn't move fast enough. Not a single person moved from where they were. Another loud voice bellowed from behind me. A woman this time, blaming me for dooming them all and damning me to hell. A sudden rush of realization hit me. And I understood exactly why this had happened. Those things waited for me to come out of Craig's bunker. They wanted me to lead them to the other survivors, and that's why they'd been stalking me on my way here. They were not allowing me any other option but to get to where I now was. But the emergency alert I received, was that another one of those creatures' mind tricks too? Like what I thought I had seen while seeking refuge in the bunker, was that really sleep paralysis or something more sinister? It was clear that the answer to these questions would remain unanswered. After piling up what I could in front of the door, I moved backwards towards the other side of the room. The people behind me continued yelling at me while I looked around for any other way out of the situation. Swiftly, I spotted a door to my left that had been left slightly ajar, and I ran towards it, hoping for something that was never going to happen. And as I swung the door open, I realized it was only a small storage area. A loud bang came from behind me, and I turned around. The furniture that I had stacked up in front of the door had been sent flying across the room, and without thinking, I moved quickly to the storage area that I'd come upon. Screams from the other side of the door bellowed throughout the enclosed area and were soon replaced by the sounds of flesh being torn apart. The storage area I'm in now has no alternate exits. No way out. It won't be long until these creatures find me in here, and there's no way I have enough bullets to even cause a dent in the numbers they have. This is almost definitely to be my last update. The only solace I have now is the fact that I'll be saving a bullet for myself. For anyone else who receives the emergency alert that I did, I'll pray for you. Good luck. And goodbye. Hey there kids, it's me, Mrcreepypasta, and I wanted to say thank you for watching tonight's video. And also, I feel like this is something that really needs to be said. I'm pretty sure all of you are hearing this far too many times from far too many places, but during the current COVID-19 crisis that's going on, make sure that you're practicing safe hygiene, wash your hands, don't touch your face, don't lick random strangers on the street. I know that there's a lot of memes going around about it, but the biggest note is that although it may not be deadly for everyone, keeping it contained reduces the risk of death to everyone. So, important. Also, a number of conventions are currently closing around the United States. If there's a convention near you that I was intending to appear at, if there's an announcement of any kind of closures, I'll be sure to let all of you know on Twitter and the community page, so make sure you're following me there to get any information about that. And also, if you look in the description down below, you're going to find a group of my friends that are artists that make their living at events and conventions such as this. So I know all of them would appreciate any kind of support that you could show, especially if you feel like you're missing out on some of their artwork from missing out of these cons. So take a look there, see if there's anything you like. I know a lot of them work on creepypasta stuff, horror movie stuff, and generally anime and comic books that at least I love, so I hope that you do as well. And a very special thank you to everybody on that Patreon, patreon.com/Mrcreepypasta, especially Ariel Torres, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Ken Lando Higuchi, Brianna Van Tine-Janzen, Chompski, TheRedOakShieldVirus, Sindee Barney, Asia, G Weevil 3, Diana Kraus, Stephen VanHuss, Tristain Pelton, Nico, TheGingerBroz, Dante Rowe, Raphael Rodriguez, Meulmeester, Eliminator86, SteampunkSinner, Kaleb Dougal, Sky Harbor, The Homeless Bird 93, Gabrielle Undefined, Bobby Carmen, Liam Newman, Aaron Stormcrow, Bobby Jean Torgan, Dr. Strawberry, The Wormhole, Barbara Macedo, and Vic. Thank you guys so much, and if anyone would like to join them on that list, head over to patreon.com/Mrcreepypasta. Here's hoping that you guys are loving the horror as much as I am. And sweet dreams.